We want to be talking to all of you.
Oh, yeah,
I'm Corby
sorry.
Kummer from The Atlantic. We have Kristi Jacobson, who's done this remarkable film that we want to applaud right now. And we've got Dan Glickman, who many of you might have seen this afternoon on this very stage. And before we get into just how controversial this film is going to be, and should be, because I want everybody to see this movie. Everybody to see this movie. I mean, as soon as I've taken a million notes, I just want to see it again. I'm really, really impressed and moved by this. So I'm very glad to have this. So tell us a little bit about how you came to make it, how the financing came, how long it took, and how much help, because we've had participant films at Aspen before. We sort of are familiar with them, but we want to hear the story of you.
Okay. Is this extremely loud?
Let's go now.
Okay.
No.
It's extremely loud and close.
And incredibly close.
Yeah. It was a movie.
Well, I'll go around and try and get to all those questions, but the last question, which is how long we've been working on it, how long it took. So my partner, my directing partner, Lori, and I first started talking about it in 2009. So it took about 3 years to make. And the inspiration for the film, how the film really came to be, started with a young girl named Sabrina that Lori, again, my co-director, sort of mentored. I was a big sister to. And she started discovering things about Sabrina's life and sort of the ever-present quest for food and how it was affecting her in terms of her behavior in school and all the rest, and ultimately realized every time whenever she had any kind of salad or greens or anything like that, would pack most of it up, not to save it for later, but to help feed her siblings. And for Lori, it was shocking to realize that this was happening right there in New York City. That's where we're both from. And she's a screenwriter and a narrative filmmaker, and we were friends and colleagues, and came to me. I'm a documentary maker. And it was like, I think there's a documentary here. It's about hunger in America. And as many people who, when I tell that I'm making this film, often say, hunger in America, there's not really a problem with hunger in America. There's a problem with obesity in America. And so I didn't know that much about it. And for me, after one day of reading the coverage of, if you just read the feel-good stories that come out every Thanksgiving about hunger in America and how let's just drop the cans off and we can get rid of hunger, then it's one thing. But if you just spend a couple of days kind of digging beneath the surface, as we did, and then starting to talk to people, for me, like once I realized how insidious this problem is, how invisible this problem is, and also that the solution is within our grasp, it felt like a story I couldn't not tell, coming from sort of the background of wanting to use documentary film to tell those untold stories and try and move people to take some action. So that was the genesis of the project, and together, Lori and I assembled a sort of superstar team of producers and cinematographers and started raising the funds independently. And it's slow going, but I was telling Dan earlier that we had some amazing angels. I mean, once you know about this issue and care about this issue, then if two women sit in front of you and tell you how this film is going to make the difference, some people supported us with some contributions that helped us get a little shooting underway, and then we made a trailer. And with that trailer, we had some fundraisers. One was in New York and one was in LA. And at the one in LA, Diane Wireman, incredible executive at Participant, attended and saw the trailer. And from there, the conversations began, and ultimately Participant came in and funded the film completely, which changed everything for us, because it was like, and I know there's some friends of mine in here who've made Detropia, by the way, which is showing tomorrow night, but when you're making an independent film, it's like you're half making the film and you're half raising the funds for the film, and it's really hard to keep...
Always.
Yeah. So we were really fortunate that at that moment in time, Participant came in. And I remember Diane saying, you have to stop being scrappy independent filmmakers, and it's not about raising the money anymore, make the film. And so that was, you know.
And are there any plans for distribution?
Yeah, so the film, we're fortunate in that Magnolia Pictures is going to be releasing the film.
Oh.
Yeah, early next year, and we're working now with them. And
They also did Food Inc., didn't they? No?
They did Food Inc. So it's like the reunion of the two, Participant and Magnolia.
Because I don't know that they had worked together before that.
Yeah, and they did a great job, and we're hoping for the same, the same kind of reach.
And also it was screened at Aspen with a conversation with the director, so it's guaranteed you success by being here.
And the thunder that happened at all the right moments felt really
Before it was distributed.
karmic.
Rain is good.
Huh?
Rain is good.
Yeah.
So there's two provocative things you both said that I am eager to pick up on, but selfishly I have to know, how did you find Barbie? Was it through Billy Shore? I think she's a star. I just want to see her and know everything about her.
Barbie, I should also say, Barbie is a tremendous person who I have love deeply and admire, and you might have noticed, but we spent the most time with Barbie. She's in Philadelphia, we're in New York. We met her through Dr. Mariana Chilton. So I had read an article that was about the Witnesses to Hunger as it had just started coming together. We started, Lori and I just started attending their meetings, and just meeting all of the women in that group really helped to educate us about what it means to be hungry, to be a someone struggling with food insecurity. And Barbie struck us, but it just, the more time we spent with her, the more her struggle became just so, I guess, seemed to so epitomize the struggle of so many.
And that speech at the end,
She's
which
a
she
poet.
wrote, right? Does she have a job now where, I want to know immediately how she is.
Well, the not great news is that she lost that job a little while ago. Things got really, really hard for her. But the exciting news is that the film, as you may know, premiered at Sundance, and Barbie was there and was the star. I didn't need to say anything at Q&As, which was fine with me. But anyway, she is. She's in the process of possibly getting a grant from a foundation called the Bertha Foundation that's going to help get her through college. And she's really, really excited about that, as are we. So that's kind of in the works. But, the struggle continues for her.
And I immediately have to know, what's the upshot with the child's health? I realized afterward, because her hair changed a couple times during the movie, I didn't know if it was she with the same child. So it's her child that's being seen in the clinic, and Mariana Chilton says, and
Yes.
brain damage can last throughout life.
Yeah.
So does she have a brain damaged child because he was hungry?
It's a good question. I don't think that we can, for certain, make the absolute causal effect between the nutrition that he had when he was a young kid. But he does. His name's Aiden, by the way, and I love him to death. He is a sweet, wonderful child who has a number of health problems and learning problems, and hopefully he's going to get into. He's been in and out of different school, daycares and schools and things, but hopefully he's going to get on track. And some of the damage is not reversible, but as you saw with our teacher Leslie Nichols, some of it's more emotional than physical, and it's sort of really hard to tell.
And again, that little girl, the Leslie Nichols little girl, whose name is
Rosie.
Do we ever know her name?
Rosie, yes.
And we find
You were
out
taking notes, which I'm glad to know you were taking notes and not emailing.
No. I was taking 5,000 notes.
No, I know you were
But
not.
I didn't know that I didn't get that her name was Rosie. So she's beautifully spoken. She's just incredible too. And how did you come across her?
Rosie, and basically, well, shortly after the funding from Participant came through, we were kind of stuck sort of filming in the tri-state area because we didn't have a lot of money, and we were like, I've got to get out of this office. We've got to get out there, and we're talking to people and talking to people. And I'd been talking to this woman, Kathy Underhill, at Hunger Free Colorado, and there was an event happening in Denver, and our cinematographer, Kirsten Johnson, has a brother who lives in Denver, and so we got on a plane and we flew to that event, and at that event we met someone who was doing something in Grand Junction, and in Grand Junction somebody said, you've got to meet this guy, Pastor Bob. This community, Colburn, is, you know, it seems that there's not a single family in that community that's not affected by hunger, and they're doing so much around trying to remove the stigma, and that was something that was really important to us. And also having filmed, we began filming with Barbie in Philadelphia, and we knew that there's not a single congressional district in this country that doesn't have a hunger problem. And we wanted to try and find a town that was reflective of the all-American town. And when we drove up the mountain and through the mesas and started to meet, you know, it was kind of like peeling the layers of an onion. First we went to one of those dinners and we met Pastor Bob, and we met the principal actually of the school, and then Leslie, and then the police chief and the rancher, and ultimately Leslie told us a story about one of her students in an interview. And when we came back and we were watching the interview, well, who is that student? And that student was Rosie. And so we came back and met Rosie and her family, and they were just, you know, tremendous in their courage to share that story with us.
So Dan, thank you. It's very, very inspiring and disturbing. And you said it might be a disturbing, controversial movie. Why?
Well, first of all, you know, I've kind of been in both worlds. So for nearly 7 years, I was chairman of the Motion Picture Association of America. And then before that, I was Secretary of Agriculture. So you talk about...
How could you be more apt?
Well, it's like my mother used to say that in my old days, I would I would raise popcorn, and then on the new job, I would sell popcorn. That was the kind of the whole... But it's supposed to be funny, folks, but I guess it didn't...
Everybody got it.
Yeah, everybody got it. But I would say a couple things. Number one is the movie for a documentary is really good. You listen to that music, T-Bone Burnett. I want to get that soundtrack to this movie.
It'll be coming out.
Really, because it's hard to make a documentary, and especially one that's got good quality to it. There are a lot of documentaries out there that really are just not very good. And so the fact that she's got a distributor, and so Magnolia has got a relationship with Landmark Theaters. I don't know if it's going to be niche or whether you're going to have wide distribution, but I assume they're going to try to get you wide enough distribution so people can see it is a really good thing. I just wanted to mention one thing. You know, I mean, it's like, the problem is I've been in, it's not that I know too much, but I've been in the world so long that there's always nuances. And so this will be somewhat controversial in the following reasons. 80% of the budget of the Department of Agriculture is in food and nutrition programs. 20% is in farm programs. So I want to make sure, so some will think that the inference of this is the reverse, and it's not the case. Now, that doesn't mean that too much money isn't going in one case and not enough money is going in another case. But back in the 1960s, a grand bargain was struck between George McGovern, Hubert Humphrey, Bob Dole, and others, by which the farm groups and the food and nutrition groups got together and said, basically, we will support you if you will support us. So out of that grew the current food stamp and school nutrition programs. That is, it basically didn't exist until they decided that the farm groups needed urban interests to support farm programs, and urban interests needed the farm groups to support their programs. So out of that grew this grand bargain, and that's kind of why you mix these issues together. It was a political imperative over the years. That's being challenged very seriously right now for the first time. The Senate passed
the House trying to detach
the House, politically, the Senate has just passed a big farm bill that makes some cuts in food and nutrition programs, but they're relatively small. The real danger is the House making very big cuts, removing a lot of eligibility for food stamps and those kinds of things. But I think the point that you talked about, which is most important for an audience like this, Bob Dole once said that, he talked about PACs and power. He said, I'd never seen a political action committee called Poor People's PAC. It doesn't really exist. So there's a lot of support for the food and nutrition programs of the Department of Agriculture, WIC. WIC is very popular. WIC is more popular
WIC is
than
Women,
SNAP.
Infants, and Children,
Yeah.
and it's one of the most effective federally run programs.
And there the government gives money to women and pregnant women and women with small children, and they allow them resources to buy about 40 or 50 designated items like cereal, fruit, vegetables. There it's limited. The difference between SNAP is a SNAP participant can purchase just about anything that you and I can purchase at a grocery store. So the WIC program tends to be more popular. It's also much smaller and everything else. So my guess is some of the people in the farm community are going to look at this movie and say, you're pitting the nutrition against the farm. And that is the grand bargain that allowed both these things to...
They are going to say that.
They
There's
are.
no question.
I know. I'm just saying from a political perspective, it will, listen, no good documentary that doesn't have a point of view and doesn't stretch the envelope is worth its salt.
Well,
okay?
and I would say that I think that what we learned in the making of the film is that these kinds of deals are necessary, right, for politicians to get what they want, be
Right.
it in the agriculture department or elsewhere. We don't have to worry about that. We're not up for re-election, so we're just trying to get what we believe to be the story out there.
But I guess my main point is, for the most part, middle-class voters don't vote on these issues. And as a matter of fact, it's interesting here at Aspen, when you look at all the discussions that we're having, there's very little discussion of poverty. A lot of discussion about how America is going to be competitive in the world and those kinds of things, and that's because, it's where all the action is. And so it just struck me that this is important to show this movie here, because there's another side to the economics of things the way they are. The real problem here is poverty and the rapid increase in structural poverty since the 1980s to the current time. It has to do with a lot of things. It has to do with manufacturing, with government action, with globalization, and you just have education. And so you have a lot of people structurally stuck in a poverty situation that you didn't have after the Second World War. It just didn't exist. Almost everybody worked then. And
well,
now,
Raj Patel encapsulates that when he says the problem isn't food, there's plenty of food, it's poverty, and answering how to solve poverty is a lot harder than building a food bank. But 200 to 40,000 in between 1980 and now is a staggering figure.
Yep.
When you say, and the end is, we can do this, we can solve this, and you've said the problems, the solution is in our hands. What is it?
Well, I think there's no one solution, and I can only speak from my point of view, but I think that when I say we know the solution, I think in the 1960s, when that film Hunger in America aired on CBS, it showed the American public something that was deeply upsetting. The hunger then looked different than it does now, but no less devastating, I don't think, in terms of the consequences.
That hunger in the Jeff Bridges 1996 movie of the humiliated father. Dan, had you seen that movie?
Yeah.
Wow, that's a powerful scene.
So I feel like, there was a lot going on at that time, obviously, that was mobilizing American citizens to hit the streets and put pressure on politicians. But so I think there's two things. I think that one is that also, though, at that time, there was no federal food stamp program. You had to buy food stamps.
Yeah.
What kind of sense did that make? But the point, so the solution might not have been evident to the person who made that film, but the point was the system was broken and needed to be adapted and modernized and well-funded. And when that happened, the problem was nearly erased. So from my point of view, if we can modernize and adequately fund the federal food safety net, that's one piece. Then we know that there's the growing importance, and we've been talking about this a lot today, of public-private collaboration and the role that communities can play. So I think that we can all do our part. And then, you know, at risk of sounding like a complete Pollyanna, I mean, I really do believe that if we made this matter to our politicians, if there were consequences for, you know, for voting, nobody votes pro-hunger, but there's a hell of a lot of people with voting records where those decisions increase hunger. So that's kind of my view.
I think, you know, first of all, there have been in the last 5 years a lot of good things that have gone on. By the way, the Child Nutrition Act did make some fundamental changes in how school districts, what they could buy, what they were eligible for. And if you go into school districts in this country, they will tell you that in the last 2 or 3 years, there have been remarkable improvements in what is served in school meals compared to what was served when I went, and they had the thin slice of roast beef, and it looked like there was a rainbow on top of it from the grease, I guess, what there is. The Farm Bill provides funding for additional purchases of fruits and vegetables for a variety of programs. The Pentagon now has an amazing program to get their soldiers and sailors and families to eat much better and to establish patterns. And they're a big force, the Defense Department, in terms of the kinds of things that are doing. The First Lady has obviously her major, you know, initiative that's there. I guess my fear is that in this zeal, you know, we have a tremendous fiscal problem in this country. So in the zeal to deal with it, we may end up doing some hardship on the most vulnerable in society, and that's the short-term problem that's there.
So I wanted to ask Dan's prognosis for the Farm Bill in the House, because you might have been following that it's come out of the Senate with its remarkable $2.5 billion, is it, that's been cut from food stamps? And
4.5.
But there was going to be so much more.
But the cuts by and large were cuts that the anti-hunger community didn't like, but they didn't believe were fundamental to the program. Now you get over to the Senate, that's where the problems could be.
The structure,
House.
In the Senate bill, the structure of the food stamp program remains.
Yeah.
There's some funding cuts that would affect how much money families were getting each month, but when it hits the House.
But the House wants to allow states, wants to block grant it, right? So
some do. Some House members do. Right now, if you go in for one program in a state, let's say one public assistance program, you're automatically eligible for others, including food stamps. It's called categorical eligibility. There's been some talk in the House about getting rid of that as well. But we don't know exactly what will happen in the House. You know, I mean, given the politics of where we are right now, it could end up being that they just can't get agreement on a farm bill before the election. They end up passing it until next year.
Well, isn't that the reason that it was reversed? It usually starts in the House and then goes to the Senate, but the Senate knew it could probably get something at least in time for this session, whereas people still think it's never going to happen this year.
Yeah, I
what
think
do you
that's true.
think?
I think it probably will happen, but I wouldn't bet the farm on it, so to speak.
So if you had your ideal, Dan, to try to help with hunger, especially based on the history of the Nutrition Acts as we've seen it from the 60s, and I had no idea just how successful in the late 70s we were, which is really interesting in how we've reverted, just the way Barbie heartbreakingly reverts to feeding her kids Chef Boyardee when she finally has a job and she becomes ineligible for these programs that help keep her family alive. That's such an ironic and awful moment to see. And it's so important that you got to show it, because I wouldn't have suspected it. You know, she's dancing. She's so happy to be at work.
As we were. I mean, we really thought that was the ending of her story. But, you know, lo and behold, you know, of course we continued to talk to her and sometimes visit with her. And then, you know, we were like, oh my God, this is completely ruining the arc that we thought was her story.
And yet it may be the most important, the most important point you make in the film. That, you know, what should be a step up in society, getting them off welfare, getting them off this assistance, actually makes it worse and much harder for them to feed their family. It's terrible.
You know, though, again, I'm just, again, from somebody who's always on the one hand and the other hand, so I apologize. Harry Truman once said he'd never met a one-handed economist because of one hand and the other hand, that kind of stuff. But we now have about 43.5 million people on food stamps. The average food stamp recipient is a family with small children. They are not on for, usually it's for less than 6 months. The people, for those who are on it, it has been, you know, it's remarkable in terms of what it's done. And as bad as this show that we saw tonight goes, and it's true that America has a very high hunger and food insecurity of the rest of the world, we have the most developed food assistance program in the world of any developed country. That is, very few people have, nobody has a food stamp system like we do.
Right.
Some of them have a school meal system like we do. But in almost all the developed countries in the world, they have a stronger social safety network in some cases, but it's not geared to food.
And would you call that a legacy of great society?
I think it's a legacy of the 1940s and 50s and the post-Civil War and school meals and again this grand bargain between farmers and people who need food assistance that was done back in the 1960s.
And school meals, if I think I'm correct in this, came out of World War II because there were so many people that were enlisting that were undernourished. And that was,
And
why,
had
that was where the
rickets
National
and
School
were
Lunch Act.
incapable of serving.
Right.
So I don't know who's running this and how much time we have and whether we have time for questions, but I've selfishly gotten to ask a bunch. There's one right there.
Hi, my name's Ashley. That was spectacular. Thanks for making it. One of the things that stood out to me most in the film was the connection that was made between campaign finance and the real decisions that are made in government and subsidies and the foods that are available in grocery stores or in corner stores, especially in food deserts. And then today in this very room, it was subtly consensed that there is no way that we can change what's going on with Citizens United and with campaign finance, and I'm wondering if there are any tangible things that we can do about subsidies and making sure increasing the availability of fruits and vegetables.
Oh, okay, now again, from my perspective, okay. One thing in the film I'm not sure I totally agree with is the impression was the cost of Cheetos is so cheap because the price of corn is subsidized. The truth of the matter is probably less than 2 or 3 cents worth of corn in a bag of Cheetos. There's less than a nickel of wheat in a loaf of bread. Most of the cost of these products are once they leave the farm. So I don't want anybody to think it is the farm program that caused the food to be so cheap that they could buy this bad food because the fruits and vegetables were more expensive. There are other reasons why fruits and vegetables are more expensive, by the way, and we should be finding ways to deal with that. But let me go back to your other question. Almost every interest group in America works the political system. And unless the public demands change in the way campaigns are financed, it's not going to change. And so the public really has to demand that. And there's a lot of lethargy out there in the country as to this. And the question, it's in your hands, really, to influence the Congress to make the changes.
I agree with the latter part of his answer. And also, you know, then on the, so public needs to demand, you need to figure out who you need to call and who you need to let know that these issues matter to you. In the near future, our film is going to be, launching a campaign that will likely include a database that will enable you to really find out what the pieces of legislation are that are affecting these kinds of issues, and who in your district is who you need to speak to. And in the meantime, there are a lot of groups and organizations doing a lot of work, very exciting and progressive work in terms of getting access to fruits and vegetables to communities that don't have access. And also in the future, when you guys hear about this film, it's going to have a different title.
This is good news.
It's going to be called A Place at the Table. And so, yay, glad to hear there's some support for that.
Yeah, I told you I like that. Yeah, that's good.
So I mention that only because for you in particular and for anybody else here who wants to try and get more information, at the moment, you can sort of get involved, get in the loop through Take Part, which is participant social action piece of their work that they do. If you Google Finding North, you'll find Take Part /Finding North or on our Facebook page. But ultimately, it's going to switch, and we're going to give you lots of information and lots of ways that you can get in there and get involved.
There were questions right in the middle here. Young person, hand up, right there. The backhand that was up, right.
Hello, my name is Jeremiah Grant. I'm one of the 2012 Basil Scholars here. I wanted to thank you for that amazing presentation. I was close to tears at one point. And my question is, when it comes to public demand, how much public demand is necessary, and I'll play on the poetic irony of it, of having a seat at the table?
Well, I'm glad you see the irony in the title. And I mean, look, you have more experience in Washington, D.C. and how it works. But I can tell you that you know, Representative McGovern, who I am a big fan of.
And I get to live in Massachusetts.
Oh my God. I mean, he's such an authentic person. And I mean, he told us about how during the time of the child nutrition bill, there were a couple different sort of letters that people were signing on to try and not have the food stamps be cut or this or that. And he said that he was going with the letter and he was trying to get his signatures from some fellow representatives. And someone said, oh, you know, I just got a call about this morning, okay. And he and others have said to me sometimes a handful of calls can make a difference. You know, that's a place to start. But then there's also, you know, the collective voice that we once had, I think can also make a difference. But so that one call, I'm just saying, or your email in this case certainly can make a difference. And I feel like, I mean, we as Americans right now feel kind of disempowered, but I mean, again, maybe I'm looking at the glass half full.
I also think the corporate and the faith-based community needs to be engaged. You saw a few people in the faith-based communities, and churches do a great job of feeding people. That's part of their mission. But by and large, I haven't seen the mainstream faith-based community get engaged in these issues, and they're very influential if they would choose to be.
And Bread for the World is one of the leaders in that area of not just feeding, but really trying to get involved in the politics and systemic changes. And also that will be a part of the A Place at the Table campaign.
I see two hands
and there's
up
a hand
and
in the
two
back
hands up
too.
there. We'll alternate with the back and go back to the center. I see you. I see you. Sorry.
Hi, good evening. I want to thank you also for that presentation. There was a comment that was made about this not being a middle class issue. And I just wanted to disagree for a moment because the middle class tends to blow through their 401ks and their savings before they look for assistance. And I was watching a documentary, a show on NBC last week that showed middle-class families in the suburbs going to food pantries. So I just wanted to know if you plan on showing that face of America by the time this documentary hits theaters.
Well, we had that Marshall.
Yeah, I think you make a very, very good point. I do think that that hunger is affecting more and more families in more and more socioeconomic classes, and yeah, as Corby was saying, the hope was to show the rancher and the policeman in Colorado to sort of in some ways represent that, but I think that's a really valid point, and I hope that we can make that point.
And you need to make the point, but I want to say this from a political perspective. This is not a big middle class issue. Trust me. I wish it were. And in fact, The middle class
You mean
is,
it's what they're not voting on?
they're not voting on it,
Right.
and they're not expressing their views to their.
Right.
When I say they,
But
I'm
that
over.
doesn't mean
I'm
that
over.
they're not affected.
No, in fact, more and more middle class people are seeing themselves in a vulnerable situation. But
Right.
but in terms of what a lot of folks, again, the vast majority of people who vote out there see. Have a lot of things on their mind, but one of them is they're not necessarily pushing for more federal spending, period. And so, I'm giving a grand view of it.
Right.
So therefore, it's just people have to make this a higher priority to members and all Congress and other policymakers.
And I think at the end of the day, it affects every one of us, whether it affects me or you personally in our daily lives and in the quest to feed ourselves or our families. It affects all of us as a nation in which A, we're not looking out for everybody, and B, in which our competitiveness and everything else is being affected by this problem. And I heard earlier today on the panel you were on, Helene Gale said, we can pay for it now and pay for it later. And so I think it affects every one of us in that regard.
We know how everybody chooses in those situations. You've been patient. You'd better have the mic.
Hi, my name's Spencer O'Brien, and I'm a 2012 Bezos Scholar as well. And first of all, congratulations on your...
Your mic's not working, I don't think.
He's a Bezos scholar.
Yeah.
And
I can repeat the question.
Yeah.
Okay. My name's Spencer O'Brien, and I'm a 2012 Bezos Scholar. And first of all, I'd like to congratulate you on your premiere at Sundance. That's really fantastic. And my question is that the title, I know you commented on it earlier, Finding North. I was just wondering if you could elaborate on the significance of that.
why, thank you for asking that. I was going to get there too.
Okay. So, well, it's a reference to how we as a nation need to find our way. We need to find our moral compass. We need to find our north. But it came from, the idea came from, you mentioned the music.
Yeah, it's in the
so
song.
T-Bone Burnett, this like amazing music producer and composer and just all around guy, basically offered to do the music for this film and introduced us to a number of great musicians, including the Civil Wars, whose music you heard throughout the film. And they wrote 2 original songs. One was that song, which we used at the opening, and another was the one during the agricultural USDA background. And that song was called Finding North, and it was a tough film to find a title for.
But in place at the table is much
Better? Better,
Yeah.
okay. Thumbs up?
I
agree.
think we've all taken a vote that it's better. I think we were probably supposed to end at 10, so I might with that explanation and the group consensus
much.
that we like a place at the
Yeah.
table.
Thank
Thank
you.
you for making this.
Thank you.
And everybody.
Thank you.
I didn't mean to